Okay, so last time we started talking about the object-oriented features that are implemented in Python. And Python is not a completely object-oriented language like Java in the sense that the object-oriented principles are enforced. They are not exactly enforced, but because the way the object-oriented principles organize the code has been proven to be beneficial, like almost every language started to include the object-oriented features in it, even if it's originally not an object-oriented language. So not only Python is that, like PHP, for example, is not originally an object-oriented language. JavaScript the same, but because of how beneficial the way the code is organized when you implement the object-oriented principles, they started to include these principles in the language. They are not exactly enforced, so if you really understand the principles and appreciate their benefit, you should take it upon yourself to apply the object-oriented principles. Okay. Now we talk about how a class would be created using the class keyword and then the name of the class. And the way we define constructors, we don't exactly define the constructor function that is called like here using the name of the class, even though this is how it is it looks like. So the constructor, we call it from outside using the class name, just like we are used in languages like Java. But internally, we don't define the function with the class name. We define a function that is called init, surrounded by double underscores. Okay. Any method defined within a class must have at least one parameter that is supposed to be the pointer to the object when it's created. Okay, so in Java and similar languages, the keyword this is used for that. In Python, this is a variable name. You choose whatever you want a name for it. Commonly, people use the word self. So if you look at the documentation and the example code and stuff like that, you would see the word self used commonly, but you're free to use any other name you want. Some people actually use the word this to make it like similar to what they learned from other language, and that's okay as well. But you just need to be aware of what is the self, what does it mean, and how is it used. Okay. Now the next concept that we will cover here. So we learned how defining methods works, and every method, not just the init, must have at least a self parameter, even if you're not gonna use the even if we don't need a reference to the object members. Okay. Now we want to talk about inheritance. Do you remember what inheritance is? Do you remember what inheritance is? So what does it mean? You have a class that inherits from another class. I have some motivators here, not a lot, but some. What? Now everybody's gonna remember what is inheritance. What is inheritance? What is inheritance? Yes. You have a parent class and a child class. That's right. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does it mean when you have a parent class and a child class? Yes. Yeah, so the code that you implement in the parent and you make a child out of it, all that code, you don't have to rewrite it. It's all inherited, so you can reuse it. You can reuse it. When you create an object of the child class, you can reuse the code that was inherited from the parent without having to redefine it, right? Okay, so you have something to say? Oh, no, I was going to say that. Okay. All right, so this is basically the most obvious benefit of the inheritance is when you have a code written and then you reuse it. Okay, there is another benefit that's called subtyping, in which you would have the child of the same type. You can treat it of the same type of the parent. Okay, so let's see how is that goes. So here we have implemented the employee class. Now we happen to know that there is another type of employees that has a different way to implement the calculate the net salary function, for example. So let's say the employee here has a function called, this was not very meaningful functions, just to explain something. Now let's say we have a calc net salary. Okay. And that's net salary just returns self the salary multiplied by a tax rate. So let's say we're gonna receive the tax rate here and multiply. And of course, this is what is deducted from the actual salary, right? But code is unreachable. Statements must be separated by new lines. What do you mean? Okay, we know that operator precedence makes the multiplication happen before the subtraction, right? Let me just change the batteries here. Yeah. Right. So this is how generally the employee, the net salary is calculated for any employee. But we happen to have a special type of employee that is the manager. And the manager also has name, email, and salary. And in addition to that, they have bonus. And they need all the functions implemented in the employee. But the salary, the net salary is calculated differently. That is to add the bonus to the net salary that's calculated for general employees. So we can create a class called manager that repeats all the code, which is a big no. You don't want to duplicate your code. So instead of repeating the code, you can define another class that's called the manager. And the manager is actually a special type of employee. So the way we perform inheritance here is to type the name of the parent inside parentheses. Okay, now if you remember in Java, in order to make, if we have a class employee that wants to inherit, manager wants to inherit from employee, how would we do it? We say manager, colon, right? And then employee. Now we don't have this, I mean, we use a colon in different place here. So we just, when we say the class name and then between parentheses another class name, it means that the one inside parentheses is the parent. Okay, means that all the code inherited, defined in the parent would be inherited in the child. Okay, yes. Yeah. The employee part or name. Now, when we refer to the self from the manager, it will refer to the manager in general. Okay. Now, see, including the init would be inherited in the child. But we just said that in addition to the name, email, and salary, the manager also has a bonus that doesn't belong to general employees. So because of that, we're gonna need to have define a constructor or an init function that takes that for initialization. So I'm gonna define the init here, and the first should be self, okay? And also we'll take all the values, because this is what we're gonna pass to the parent. But in addition to that, it would also take a bonus value. Okay. Now we have this as a default. We can give this a default, or we can rearrange them. Well, if we arrange them, then we're gonna mess up the order there. So let's just give this a value. Let's say the default is 500. Okay. Now we need to pass some of these parameters to the parent object. Now see what happens when you have a child like this. When you create an object of the child, you are actually creating two objects. Okay? So when we eventually say that, let's say M equal manager, and we send some parameters to the constructor. So what we have M pointing to some object, right? Now inside this object there is sub object. So there is the manager object and there is the employee object. That all of them are part of that object we created. So for the employee part, we have the name, the email, and the salary. And for the manager part, we have only the bonus. Okay. So when we receive the initial values for these parameters in the constructor of the parent, we need somehow to pass them to the constructor of that child. When we receive them in the constructor of the child, we need somehow to pass them to the constructor of the parent so that they will create a sub-object there. Does that make sense? So we are receiving the parameters, the arguments, when we are calling the constructor of the manager, right? When we call the constructor of the manager, the constructor of the employee also calls internally to create the sub-object that is the employee part of the manager. Now, how can we pass the parameter sent to the constructor of the manager to the constructor of the parent, that is the employee? There are two ways to do that.